Hey guys, in this video I'm going to do a modification on these in-process blanks. These come from the late great Mike Skiba. Mike was an independent cymbalsmith who had a very prolific career. He also shared a ton of knowledge about the process and the craft of making cymbals by hand. And I was reached out to recently by Adam Nywood, a New York City-based saxophonist and drummer, and he had these hi-hats that were in process, and Mike didn't get to finish them before he passed, and he basically his wife gave them to Adam as a gift, and Adam has had them sitting in his practice studio, and he's been looking for someone to take them to completion. So he reached out to me. I have known about Mike ever since I got into this thing. I've looked up information and found a couple articles here and there of things that he wrote about with the process of cymbal making. Unfortunately, a lot of his writings were lost when the Cymbalholics forum crashed, but his legacy is still out there and still affecting the world that I operate in. And so he's one of the greats that came before me, and so I wanted to refamiliarize myself with his work. And so what I did was I reached out to Chad Anderson. He was the guy who started and ran the Cymbalholic forum. He knew Mike well. He visited Mike in his workshop multiple times, I believe, and has played a lot of Mike's work. So we did a podcast interview. I'm going to link that below in this video. And I did that conversation because, one, I wanted to talk with Chad. It's been a while since we've connected, and we've never had a Zoom interview like that. And two, I wanted to dive into the work of Mike Skiba. I haven't had the chance to play many of his cymbals, hardly any actually, and he's only ever been kind of this enigmatic figure kind of in the background. I've known about him, but I haven't had more information about who he was and the kind of work that he did. So the conversation with Chad really helped open my mind to the artisan and the craftsman that he was. And with this project of modifying these hi-hats, I really want to pay homage to him and also just spread awareness. If you've never heard of Mike Skiba, you should get yourself hip to that. And if you ever see a Mike Skiba in the wild, definitely check it out. So let's talk about these hi-hats in particular, the specs on them, and then what I'm going to do to modify them to completion. All right, so we have ourselves a 14-inch, and then we have a oblong 14 1/4. So the oblong one weighs 1,303 grams, and it's unlathed top and bottom. The one that's 14 is a perfect circle. It's unlathed on top and lathed on the bottom. So he did the initial pass of lathing on the bottom, and it weighs 1,232 grams. So Adam reached out to me and gave me all of the information on the different hi-hats that he owns, the kind of sounds he likes, and so I'm keeping that in mind with modifying these. He wants one of these hi-hats to be slightly undersized, so it kind of sits within the bottom hi-hat. And so what I'm going to do is the heavier one that's oblong and unlathed both sides, I'm going to cut it down to 13 7/8 inches. That's going to have it sit a little bit within the 14-inch hat. And then I'm going to lathe them. Mike has already shaped these hi-hats. They already have a really, really nice shape actually for a set of hi-hats. They're kind of a little bit low, but kind of bordering on the medium height. And so they'll be nice low-pitched hats as is. So I'm going to start by just getting the weight sort of in the zone, kind of in the ballpark of where our target is. And then from there, I got to decide if I'm going to try to do any additional hammering. Now, Adam also sent over another hi-hat that was a little bit closer to like a 15-inch. It's like 15 1/4, I believe. And this is another one, top and bottom unlathed. And he really graciously said, just keep this for yourself. Keep it as like a memento to Mike. And I'm very interested in actually finishing this hi-hat and pairing it with another one that came from a blank that I did, and having them as a set of personal hi-hats. So this is kind of a peripheral thing to this project, as I'm going to be working on on that to be able to basically pair up a set of hats for the shop, for myself, for the shop, just to keep around and also to kind of study, because again, this cymbal here, this bigger one that he sent, is already shaped pretty well into a nice medium-low hi-hat shape. So this is going to be a very fun project. I'm very excited to see how it turns out, and I'm going to show you guys a little bit of the process. But just because I know some of you are going to ask, I'm going to put these hi-hats as is on a hi-hat stand, and we'll play them. They're going to be very chunky, heavy, loud sounding, but just so you guys can get a sense for how they sound before I get into the modification. As you can tell, they're already screaming loud. Let's see how they sound. All right, so first up is heading over to the lathe, cutting down the diameter of this guy. So this bottom one is actually going to be our top. And then from there, we're going to start removing weight. And throughout the process, I'll talk about kind of my thought process with this, where I remove the weight, how I'm removing the weight, what kind of grooves am I cutting. Because with this modification, it's mostly a lathe mod. And being able to pull out the dimension and the sound, I'd want to rely much more on the lathing than I do any kind of hammering. Usually I really rely on my hammering, but with this one, since the hammering is done and I want to keep it relatively where it was. Also, I don't know exactly how old these blanks are. They're definitely years and years old, so they might not be worth hammering on, and that could be kind of semi-dangerous to the structural integrity. So I'm really wanting to emphasize lathing in this modification and see if I can pull the kind of sound out that Adam wants, but do it mostly through the lathe. So let's head over there and we'll get cutting. All right, so after the cut down, it's right at 13 7/8, and the weight on it is right around 1,200 grams. So that's the fully Turk one. This one is 1,232 with the lathe bottom. This is gonna be our bottom hi-hat. So I'm gonna start by taking weight off this top hi-hat. I think initially what I'm gonna go for with a set of 14s is my favorite general weight setup, which is approximately 800 over 1,000. That's like my go-to for jazz weights, but I'm not gonna go all the way there right off the bat. I'm gonna basically work to get these to probably about a 900 over 1,100. See how it sounds, see if it needs any hammering. From there, I can take it to the final stage and get the weight dialed in based on the sound that I'm hearing. So time to make some cuts. All right, so after all that work that I did, both hi-hats are in kind of a stage 1, so to speak. So the cymbal that was an oblong that I cut down is, like I said in the video, 13 7/8, or around about there. And then I shaved it top and bottom, and the weight on it is now 986 grams. The bottom hi-hat, I shaved top and bottom. It already had a nice edge, and it is now 1070. So we are kind of in the range, we're getting close to the range of the target. These are, I would consider these medium weight hi-hats. They would work well for louder genres where you need the hi-hats to cut. The brighter sound will get through the music a little bit better. And so they could be finished in this state as they are right now. Obviously the top hi-hat being a little undersized is sort of sitting in this bottom hi-hat, which can give it an interesting character on the foot check. So let's take a listen to how they sound just straight after the lathing, given that they will rest over the next day or so and kind of open up and have some more shimmer and high-end frequencies. So bright, I mean, these things sound nice to me. Obviously the room that I'm in, the workshop is rather reverberant, and so the sounds are kind of bouncing all around. So it sounds in this room a little bit brighter than it probably would in a drier room or a room where you're playing with other instrumentalists. It might blend a little bit better in that context. But I am thinking that we're going to be taking it down in weight further. So, you know, I'm thinking since the 13 7/8 one, you know, I think the aim is going to be around 850, if I'm to guess. And then the bottom hi-hat might be about good. So that bottom hi-hat with any set of hi-hats is really where you're getting the clarity with the foot sound. So that nice chunk that cuts through the music. If you get your bottom hi-hat too thin, it starts to sound hollow, which can be a vibe for very particular musical genres, but a really hollow sounding hi-hat on the foot isn't going to be as functional when you're trying to drive a band with the 2 and 4. So having a set of hi-hats that have clarity to them is really, really nice. I mean, famous examples of drummers that use really heavy hi-hats one is Tony Williams, another is Steve Gadd. These guys, it's said that what they would do is they would actually take 2 bottom hi-hats and pair them together as a set. So you'd have 2 really heavy, chunky hi-hats. They would be loud as all get out, but they would get through the mix in any genre. So it's all about the flavor, the kind of sound you're looking to get, the color that you want to get. So given that these cymbals belong to a jazz saxophonist, we're kind of aiming more in the jazz genre. However, jazz doesn't always mean paper thin. One of the things I learned about Mike Skibo from talking to Chad Anderson is that Mike was really hip to the fact that heavier weights oftentimes get the job done better than the super paper thin stuff. And that's a train that I've been on for a little while now. I still make plenty of paper thin cymbals. Plenty of my customers want paper thin cymbals for their gigs, and it works for them. But when we talk cymbals, we always have to talk about perspective, and how it sounds to you out behind the kit is not how it sounds out front to the audience and even to the band members. So kind of having a little bit more of a holistic view of your cymbal sounds is really, really important in order to create something musical, something that works for the situation that you find yourself in. So what we're going to do now with this hi-hat in particular is we're going to let it rest. The shapes are a little bit low for my liking, but they might just work. One thing that I can do to compensate for a lower shape is I can actually leave a little bit more weight on it. I find that lower shapes tend to sound a little bit more mushy and gong-like, and especially with hi-hats, mushy and gong-like is not what you want. You want strength. So the lower shapes tend to be less strong. The more umbrella they get, the more strong they get in their shape, but they also kind of come along with weird hums and tones. So a nice low hi-hat, medium low hi-hat can be wonderful, but if you get it too thin, it starts to sound mushy. So These are kind of on the edge shape-wise, where I kind of would, if they were my cymbals, I probably would hammer them a little bit, but I'm not sure I want to do that for these. So I might be kind of adjusting my goals for the gram weight targets and just bumping them up a little bit. So if they have a little bit more mass, that can compensate for the lower, flatter shape and still give you nice clarity on the foot sound. So we're going to let those rest. And I'll go ahead and show you the other ones. I didn't show much of the process of lathing the other set here, but I did get those into a round one as well. So again, that's the 15-inch. It was kind of like a 15 1/4 inch. And so what I did was I grabbed this flat blank, and as you can tell, it's got some holes next to the center hole. That's because this blank was an older blank that I kind of misplaced, and I pulled it out, and it was months and months old. It might have been upwards of like 8 months to a year old, which blanks, when they get old like that, they get a little bit hard and brittle, and especially when you're hand forming a bell, like this one has a hand formed bell, it can be a little bit tricky. So as I was hammering the bell, I was just kind of going for it and just throwing caution to the wind. And I think, and it's not guaranteed, but I think there was a couple micro cracks. And so what I did was I just drilled them out. And what this will do in the hi-hat is just give it an extra air escape, and so it can help with a little bit of dryness. On the mic skiba that was given to me, I lathed the top, and I left the bottom unlathed in the center, except for the outer band there. And this is my way of kind of leaving a little bit of a trace of Mike's work for me to look back on over the years. I'll be able to kind of see the hammering patterns in the light there. See if I can get it to catch light. There we go. You can kind of see the hammering patterns. I haven't done any hammering to this thing. The thing with these two especially, given that I cut this one down and I went over, I cut it down closer to 14 1/2 inches. And then I cut this one down. This one was a 16-inch piece before I cut it down. So it was hammered, and then you cut the edge down, and it's a lot lower in the shape. So both of these are mega, mega low. So thinking about how to actually get the right kind of sound, I'm going to definitely be hammering this top hi-hat of mine, and then I'm going to try to keep the mic skiba unhammered. But let's check out how these sound just after the work. So this is a perfect example of mushy, kind of thumpy, mushy, sort of ill-defined and sluggish. And that is because of this top hi-hat. This top hi-hat got really, really flat after the cut down. So if I can get it to, it's really flat, and it's especially flat out here. And I've got some ability to, I could just literally flip the cymbal inside out with just a little flick of the wrist. So that's no bueno. We want this to have more strength than that. I was just going to show you how it dips, but then I just pressed and the whole thing inverted. So what I need to do with this one is to hammer a little bit more shape and more strength into it. And then what that'll do is it'll get rid of that kind of low, mushy thing. I kind of would describe it also as like a thumpy thing, like thump, 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 as opposed to chick, where it's like it's pointed and it's got clarity to it. So we have a 1,009 gram top, and the mic skiba, which I think this one's finished. I don't know if I'm going to touch it anymore. This one is at 1,171 grams. So the mic skiba will most likely be the bottom. Originally I had thought maybe I'll just shave them and match weight them, but I think I'll just have the mic skiba be the bottom hi-hat, especially since this one has the nice hand-formed bell on top. I would really like, and I might do this depending on how they sound, I would really like a match set. So match weighted hats. So then what I could do is I could swap the hi-hat depending on whichever one I want on top will give me a slightly different sound. But with that, I would have to commit to a thin jazz hi-hat because we have 1,009 grams on the top. So, all right, guys, I'll jump back on when I've had a little bit of time for these cymbals to rest, and I've done the hammering on this, and I'll show you the final modification. I'm going to revisit all my notes from Adam, and he has a bunch of videos that he sent me of his hi-hats so I can hear the sounds that he's working with and try and give him something that's a little bit different from what he has while also still being super functional for him. So I'll hop back on in a few days and we'll see where we're at. These hi-hats are done. The final weight is 840 grams on top, and the bottom is 1,033 grams. Again, we have top hi-hat that is 13 7/8. Bottom hi-hat's right on 14 inches. This allows the cymbals to, the top cymbal to sit within the bottom cymbal, a la Max Roach, and it gives them a really nice defined foot chick. I ended up adding a brilliant finish to these, which to me is kind of indicative of how they could have possibly looked if they were a set of old vintage Ks straight from the factory. There were some of those old Ks that came out brilliant. They would use bits that created a brilliant finish, which I will say there's different ways of getting a brilliant finish on a cymbal. There's ways of using a material and buffing the surface to get a brilliant finish. The way that I do it is with an actual cutting tool that cuts in a brilliant finish. There's also a way, if you have a carbide bit, that once it kind of dulls a little bit and rounds, it starts to cut a brilliant finish into the surface. That happens if, usually I'm a little bit too lazy. I don't want to keep sharpening my bit as much as I should be, so I just keep lathing with it, and eventually it gets to a point where it starts cutting in a brilliant finish. It takes more time, it's not cutting off as much material, but it gets there. And it was kind of a happy accident because I was using a slightly dull bit as I was cutting away the material. I was getting close to being done. I didn't want to stop the lathe and go and sharpen it. And it started to cut in this brilliant finish, and it was like a point of inspiration for me. I was like, oh yeah, these should totally have a brilliant finish on top and bottom. So then I got my brilliant cutting tool out and finished the job, got them into a nice place. These are, to me, kind of the gold standard for a jazz hi-hat weight distribution, which is 800 over 1,000, kind of relatively there. Anyway, enough talk. Let's listen to how they sound. So I'll play them in a second with the cameras behind, and you can kind of get more of a player's perspective on how they sound. But to me, in the room, right in front of the hats, they have this kind of nice zing to them. It's almost like a lemon zesty kind of sound, this kind of sheen on the top end. I find that sound is really, really nice to have in a cymbal for a certain way of translating live. Like, it really does a good job of kind of getting out in front and not getting lost in the mix of your overall cymbals. Really dark cymbals that have no top end, no sibilance can really come across muddy. You might have enough weight to get the stick definition to cut, but they will probably overall translate a little bit more mid-rangey, muddy. When you have a nice top end, glittery, sparkly kind of sound on the top, that tends to really do a good job getting out in front and kind of translating well. So these hi-hats are sort of an interesting mixture of bright and dark sounds happening at the same time. Obviously, they were hand-hammered by Mike Skiba, so the hand-hammered element is there, which is giving them kind of like an old K thing. But the brilliant finish and the way that I lathe them is maybe giving them a little bit of an old A kind of sound. So they're kind of living in between those two worlds, to my ear at least. And I'm leaving them totally raw, unfinished. So they've got the brilliant finish on there, but there's no surface finish, there's no wax or any kind of like sealant to protect it, because I want this to develop its own patina rather fast. I don't want to like hold that off. So over the course of a year, 2 years, it being handled, touched, oils in your fingers and the environment that it's in is going to develop a nice natural patina. It'll kind of help mellow out the top end zing, but it's there and it's going to work really well and translate really well, I think. So let me know what you think about these Mike Skiba modified hi-hats. as a little final note, the other one over here, the Mike Skiba bottom hi-hat, these ones ended up being about 14 5/8 of an inch, so, or maybe closer to 14 1/2. And I'm not really sure how I feel about my top hi-hat paired with this one, the one that I had with the holes in it. So the weights on it, this Mike Skiba bottom hi-hat is 1154. I shaved the top, gave it a brilliant finish, and left the bottom unlathed. Sonically, I don't prefer that, but I wanted to leave some vestige of Mike's work and being able to see the hammering that he did. And so I thought dry bottom hi-hat, super cool. This top hi-hat is 972 grams. I don't know if I said this. The bottom hi-hat is 1154. And so slightly oversized. I think they sound all right, but they might need just time to develop, or I might just scrap this top hi-hat, put a different one on, and have this top hi-hat for a different set. I much prefer these ones just because the bells help them translate well. They just have like a nice clear voice to them. One thing I didn't mention earlier is that the bells on these are a little bit oblong, and that would have been something that was pressed in at the Turkish foundry or the Chinese foundry, wherever these blanks were sourced from. I think they're Turkish, but I can't be sure about that. So sometimes they just kind of get the blanks a little bit off, and the bell presses kind of go in a little bit weird. And so on the lathe, when I was turning both of these hats, you could just see the bell kind of wobble, which just shows that it's not uniform. It's not perfectly uniform. I think that also kind of helps the vibe. I think that's kind of helping it be more of an old K vintage kind of vibe, which I like. You know, to me, perfect uniformity in a cymbal leads to ultimate versatility and, you know, in some sense functionality, but it also kind of takes away all the vibe, and it sort of makes the sound a little bit sterile to my ears. So all that to say, I think this was a really fun project. I like how these turned out, but I would love to know what you guys think. So please drop a comment below, subscribe, hit the bell, all that fun jazz, and keep an eye out for the next video. My name is Timothy Roberts. See you guys later.